Wifey's shocking confession after I caught her cheating. Hey, let me ask you something. What would you do if you came home one day and found out your spouse was cheating? Think about it for a second. What would you feel? Anger? Sadness? Maybe a mix of both? Or would you just feel numb, unable to process what's happening? And the big question is, would you confront them immediately, or would you keep quiet and let it eat you up inside, not knowing what to do? Trust me, this is one of those life moments that changes everything. It's not just a fight or a small misunderstanding. It shakes you to your core. If you're curious about how this kind of situation plays out, stick around because today I'm sharing a personal story that's going to make you question everything you know about relationships. Imagine this: you've been married for a while and things seem to be going okay. Maybe there's the usual ups and downs of life, but nothing that raises any real red flags. And then it hits you. The shocking, soul-crushing reality. You find out your wife, the person you trusted the most, has been cheating on you. Let me paint a clearer picture of what happens when you discover that your spouse has been unfaithful. It's not just about that initial shock, though that part feels like someone's dropped a bomb on your life. It's the aftermath that truly weighs on you. I remember standing there, piecing together the evidence, and the realization was like a punch to the gut, an actual physical pain that left me breathless. It wasn't just betrayal, it was a violation of everything we had built. The memories, the shared experiences, the trust, it all felt meaningless in that moment. The worst part, the questions that flood your mind. How long has this been going on? Was it something I did? Am I not enough? These thoughts spin in your head like a broken record, making it impossible to focus on anything else. Each question is like a dagger, twisting the knife deeper into the wound. You start doubting yourself, doubting everything about your relationship. It's like your entire world is flipped upside down, and you don't know which way is up anymore. Then comes the challenge. What are you supposed to do now? You think you know how you'd react in a situation like this, but when it happens, it's a whole different reality. Do you confront her? Do you lash out in anger, demanding answers? Or do you shut down, not even knowing how to begin processing the betrayal? The questions are endless. For me, I felt like I was standing at a crossroads. One path led to confrontation, another to reconciliation, and a third led to just walking away from everything we had built. The hardest part of all this is that there's no clear answer. Nobody hands you a guidebook on how to deal with infidelity in your marriage. You're left to figure it out on your own, grappling with emotions you didn't even know you could feel. Every conversation becomes loaded with meaning, and every moment spent in the same room feels like a test of your emotional endurance. How do you keep going when every time you look at her, you're reminded of what she did? The feelings of anger, sadness, and deep confusion create an emotional cocktail that's almost unbearable. But here's the kicker. No matter how much pain you're in, part of you still loves that person. And that love makes it even harder to decide what to do next. You want to scream at her, demand answers, but at the same time, there's a part of you that just wants to hold on to the good memories, the life you had before this happened. It's this internal tug of war that makes everything so much more complicated. After that initial shock wore off, I found myself replaying every moment of our relationship, desperately searching for clues I might have missed. It's funny how hindsight works, isn't it? Suddenly, all these little things that seemed insignificant at the time took on a whole new meaning. I started to remember the moments when she'd get a little too protective of her phone, or the times when she'd come home late from work without a good explanation. At the time, I brushed it off. I trusted her. I mean, we all get busy, right? But now, those moments stood out like bright neon signs that I had somehow ignored. Trust is such a delicate thing in relationships. It's something we often take for granted until it's broken. And once it's shattered, it's almost impossible to look at the other person the same way. Every little action becomes suspect. Every glance, every conversation, even the way they laugh, it all feels tainted by this newfound knowledge. I realized that I had missed more than just the obvious signs. I had missed the deeper signals that our relationship was drifting apart. As I sat there piecing together the puzzle, I realized something else. It wasn't just her actions that led to this. Sure, she made the choice to betray our trust, but our relationship had already been on shaky ground. Looking back, I noticed how we had stopped having those meaningful conversations that once connected us. We used to talk about our dreams, our fears, our future. But somewhere along the way, those conversations turned into quick chats about who was picking up groceries or whose turn it was to take out the trash. It wasn't that we stopped caring about each other, but we had allowed life to get in the way. The day-to-day grind of work, bills, and responsibilities had created this distance between us, and I didn't even see it happening. It was subtle like erosion. Over time, the strong foundation we had built together started to wear away, little by little, until there was barely anything left to stand on. I started thinking about the ways we had grown apart. I was focused on my career, and she was focused on hers. We lived in the same house, but it felt like we were living in different worlds. We stopped sharing the little moments, the good morning kisses, the late night talks, the spontaneous adventures we used to go on. We became more like roommates than lovers, and the sad part is that I didn't even realize it until it was too late. I think one of the biggest lessons I learned during this time is how easy it is to overlook the warning signs when you're caught up in the routine of life. When you trust someone completely, you tend to overlook the small changes in behavior. But in hindsight, those small changes were the beginning of a much larger problem. It's like you're driving down a road, and you don't even notice that you've slowly veered off course until you're completely lost. And that's where we were lost. But instead of pulling over and trying to find our way back, we just kept going, thinking everything would somehow work itself out. We both made mistakes. We both failed to communicate. And in the end, that failure to communicate is what created the gap that allowed someone else to step in. And then came the moment I had been dreading but knew I had to face, the confrontation. I remember sitting across from her, my heart pounding so hard in my chest I thought it might burst. My hands were shaking, and a part of me wanted to walk away, to avoid the conversation entirely, but I couldn't. I had to know the truth. I had to hear it from her. When I laid out the evidence in front of her, the late nights, the phone calls, the little signs I had ignored, it was like watching her entire world crumble. The look on her face said it all. There was no denial, no attempt to cover it up, just raw fear and regret. I could see it in her eyes, that look of someone who knows they've done something that can never be taken back. And as much as I had prepared myself for this moment, nothing could have prepared me for the reality of it. When she finally confessed, her voice was barely above a whisper. She admitted to everything, every detail, and with each word, it felt like another piece of my heart was being ripped apart. I had imagined this moment 100 times, but none of those imaginings compared to the pain I felt hearing it from her lips. She told me that she had felt neglected, that our relationship had changed. She said she was lonely, that she didn't feel like I saw her anymore. I sat there, torn between wanting to scream at her for what she had done and feeling this deep, gut-wrenching sadness, because in a way I understood. It didn't justify her actions, not by a long shot, but I could see how the cracks in our relationship had grown into a chasm that someone else had slipped into. The love, the trust, the bond that we had built over years now felt so fragile, like it could be blown away with a single breath. Her confession was more than just an admission of guilt. It was a revelation of how far we had both drifted apart without even realizing it. And that realization hurt just as much as the betrayal itself. There was anger, of course. How could there not be? But there was also sadness, a profound sense of loss for what our relationship used to be. The more she talked, the more I could see that this wasn't just about her infidelity. It was about both of us, about how we had let the connection between us fade without even noticing. I remember we both cried that night. It wasn't just her tears, it was me too. There was this moment of raw vulnerability between us, a moment where we both realized the weight of what had happened and what it had done to us. We sat in silence for what felt like hours, neither of us knowing what to say next. The air between us was thick with emotion, anger, sadness, regret, and yet, somewhere in that mix, there was still love. A broken, damaged love, but love nonetheless. I had a decision to make. Was this the end? Could I forgive her? Could we rebuild what had been broken? These questions swirled in my mind, but there were no easy answers. All I knew in that moment was that everything had changed, and we were standing at a crossroads with no clear path forward. Looking back on this entire experience, one thing is crystal clear. Relationships are incredibly fragile, and they require constant attention and care. You can't just set them on autopilot and expect everything to be okay. The moment you stop communicating, the moment you stop putting in the effort, is the moment things can begin to fall apart. And the worst part, you might not even realize it until it's too late. What I learned through all of this is that trust and communication are the foundation of any healthy relationship. Without trust, there's nothing. And without open, honest communication, even the strongest bonds can weaken over time. I've come to understand that a relationship is like a living thing. It needs to be nurtured, fed, and given attention, or it withers. In our case, we let the small cracks in our relationship grow into massive divides, and neither of us knew how to bridge that gap. But even in the face of betrayal, there are important lessons to be learned. I realized that no matter how broken things might seem, there is always a chance for growth, reflection, and understanding if both people are willing to work for it. That doesn't mean every relationship can or should be saved, but it does mean that even in the darkest times, there's an opportunity to learn something about yourself, your partner, and what you both need in order to move forward, whether that's together or apart. This experience has left me with a deeper understanding of how important it is to constantly check in with the person you love, to make sure that you're on the same page, and to never assume that just because things seem fine on the surface, that they really are. It's about putting in the effort, having the tough conversations, and making sure that you're both committed to nurturing the relationship every step of the way. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation? How did you handle it? Or maybe you're going through something like this right now. Either way, I'd love to hear your story in the comments below, and let's support each other through these challenging times. And if you found value in this story, or if you want more honest, raw discussions about relationships, trust, and personal growth, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. That way, you'll never miss another story, tip, or piece of advice. Let's navigate these tough topics together, and hopefully, we can all come out stronger on the other side.